Rain, who said that it was thanks to online social media that it helped to create civil society in Russia. It was because of the online social networks that civil society grew in Russia. So that was quite interesting. Some talked about the internet, social media as a tool for courage. They said, people from countries like Egypt said that it wasn't the video clips which mobilized people. It was rather that what went viral wasn't that. It was the courage which went viral. So of course, hope is what online social media provokes. Hope in people. From my point of view, human rights is fundamental in this context, and we should never lose sight of that. Fundamentally, we're talking about the right to freedom of expression and access to information, and the right to assembly and association. And in particular, I think the freedom of expression, but the freedom to receive information. When we talk about media, the freedom to receive that information in order to make decisions, in order to be informed, etc. So when you read about in countries where access was cut, like in Egypt, for example, and the right to receive information was denied, that really, for me, is about a violation of freedom of expression. And in that case, the Egyptian authorities didn't realize what that meant. Cutting access actually brought people onto the streets, and we all know about that. So, freedom of expression, you have the corollary of freedom of expression, which is media freedom, which is very much protected in many countries, and internet freedom, which I think is coming through as maybe a corollary of media freedom. That's something I would like to posit. Internet is an enabler, of course, for rights. You see regarding media freedom that it's a political priority. It's been a political priority for many countries for many years. Internet freedom is coming through, not just in the US, but in many other countries, in European countries, as a foreign policy priority. Because, we're talking about things across borders. We're talking about a cross-border, de facto cross-border, regardless of frontiers, freedom. So, of course, regimes and others are learning to control, to understand how to use the online social media, tracking and surveillance. We read a lot about tracking and surveillance now. You can see that's creeping back. We see technology being usurped by technology, circumvention. But it's not really only about protecting the technology. It's also about protecting the people. So getting back to the freedoms. Online social media has a clear role in extending the life of civil disobedience. You think about things like what happened in London last year with the riots and how online social media was used there, for good and for bad. And when you look at the media and where that's going, when you think about Newsweek and it's now stopped its print of Newsweek, and you think about El País, and you think about media and the way that jobs are being cut in the professional media terms now, this disaggregation of media. And the reduction in professional media, one could argue. Where are we going? Where are we going to with all of this? We're used to professional media, and we're used to internet media or information sources. What's going to happen if we start changing the balance between professional media, and internet sources? Are we going to have more civic engagement? Will it promote more local media, more local engagement that some of you have mentioned in your papers? I think there's a lot to discuss, and I very much look forward to discussions with you. I look forward to knowing more about what you think about tomorrow's internet as well as tomorrow's media. And, the day after a revolution, the day after things have changed, the day after civil unrest happens, where do you go to then? And on that point, I'd like to start with the first speaker, who is Navid Hassanpour from Yale University. Thank you for coming, Hassan, and Navid, sorry. Media disruption and revolutionary unrest. Evidence from Mubarak's quasi-experiment. Navid, please tell us more, and tell us more about your position, please.
So, I'm Navid Hassanpour from Yale Political Science Department. I'm also affiliated with Yale's Information Society Project at the law school. I think that I'm going to work with a slide, so I'm going to stand up. I'm going to be on the other side. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. So, today specifically I want to talk about censorship. So about the role of social media in popular unrest has been studied by multiple authors and scholars. What I'm focusing on today is what an abrupt disruption of social media, either traditional or novel, would do to social mobilization. Is it going to encourage it, or is it going to discourage it? So during the past 2 or 3 years, we have seen many examples of governments, authoritarian as well as in fact democratic ones, cracking down on social media and means of communication in a way to control unrest. So this existence of the off-switch possibility, it has given these sources of power this dilemma: if they should turn it on, keep it on, or if they should turn it off. So examples of it would be the Egyptian disruption of new media and mobile communications on January 28th. Also, during the UK riots last year, it was widely discussed if the government should disrupt the BlackBerry messaging system or not, and it didn't happen. And also during the San Francisco BART incident, in which the cell phone towers were turned off preemptively to prevent social unrest. So I want to, at the end, I want to somehow argue this point that censoring new media would not necessarily be through summary disruption. There would be more nuanced ways of tracking and surveillance, not necessarily stupid things that the Mubarak regime basically done on the 28th, bearing unexpected results. So I want to somehow contextualize this in history, because this is not something that just is happening now. There's a precedent. There are precedents to these events, and one of them, in fact, when you study the history of the Russian Revolution in 1917, and you look into the news coming out of Petrograd in February, New York Times reported right after the fall of the Duma that, as you can read here, the triumphant revolutionaries, after taking over the Duma, they held a meeting and they decided against renewal of the newspapers, because newspapers went out of business right when the riots were happening, and it generated a sense of uncertainty and anxiety in Petrograd during that time that somehow inflamed the uprising. They decided against publication of newspapers right away because they thought that quote unquote, they wanted to prevent the spreading of fantastic rumors which might harm the common cause. Therefore, only one newspaper is to be issued twice a day and is to be distributed free and edited by a committee of Petrograd journalists whose rooms are in the Duma building. So I want to give you, a perspective of how important these things are. And these were the people who were in fact involved in that rioting, so they knew about it. That's not the only example. It also happened in Iran in 1978. In fall, Michel Foucault was reporting for fall 1978. He was reporting for Courrier de la Sera, and he was in Tehran at the time, and he saw that Iranian newspapers were off for 2 months, from beginning of November to beginning of January. So his idea was that the blackout basically somehow excited the population in a way that they started using subterranean means of communication that were invisible to the government. They went to mosque, they talked to each other, they used audio cassettes, and this is Foucault's statement that if the Shah is about to fall, it will be due mainly to the audio cassettes, because they're tool par excellence of counter information, not necessarily information. So in these situations, false information, sometimes rumors, are sometimes as rousing as true information. Okay, so before I show you some numbers, I just want to tell you what might the mechanisms underlying these events be. So just imagine this is on the left side, so you have a loosely connected network. So people call up each other on their cell phones, they basically read newspapers, they exchange emails. So you basically clean up all of the links, and you're left with a bunch of nodes, and people reach out to make new links. And what happens then? So the new network basically would be a sparse graph on the right, and the radical elements, those are the ones who reach out. So basically, those guys are going to be more central in new networks compared to the old ones. And I want to argue that that's exactly what happened in Egypt, and perhaps even before in Iran in fall 1978. So this, the generation of new links are extremely important, and the radicals are the ones who reach out. So you basically, once you clean it up, you allow radicals to fill the void and become central. So there is some theoretical underpinning to this. You can show that, I can give you the intuition. It's very easy. If you look at the left side, just imagine one of these three guys is a radical person, and two of them are normal, risk averse people. So the guy with threshold 0 in black. This is the Granovetter threshold model, so I don't want to talk. But just imagine you have a radical guy who's trying to convert two people who are conservative. You don't want the two conservative people to talk to each other the way they are on the left side. So if you just clean up the network and you have a new one in which the radical guy is in the middle, you'll have more efficient mobilization, because the conservative people, they're not talking to each other, somehow resonating and somehow discouraging mobilization. And that's basically what is beneath the previous graph that I showed you. So based on this simple intuitive reasoning, what I propose is that, so the hypothesis, disruption of the internet and cell phone networks, it does three things. It implicates apolitical citizens who are unaware or uninterested in the developments. It forces more face-to-face communication and physical presence in the streets, because they have to go out and remove this sense of anxiety, the blackout. And so the result of that would be it effectively decentralizes the rebellion. So if you're a social scientist and you want to somehow test this, what it tells you is that, okay, go and look after the dispersion of these protests. So if what I'm saying is true, and this is what's happening, then if disruption happens, I should see protests that are more dispersed, right? So citizens listen to each other in these dispersed smaller networks, and radicals become more influential. In such a situation, the state is deprived of venues for surveillance and threatening. Somehow authoritarian states, they need a medium to communicate the threats to their population. When they get rid of it, they don't have that ability. And also crowds in such situations, they shape an idea of risk that is independent of the government. The link is broken. They think differently from, so if you've ever read Jim Scott, he talks about public and hidden transcripts. So hidden transcripts are going to be completely decoupled from public transcripts when you do such a thing. Okay, so you look at the Egyptian case and how the disruption happened, disruption of the internet. It happened on the 28th. The first day, the internet and cell communications were completely off. The second day, the cell communication came back, but internet was shut off till February 2nd. So below is the Google services, the level of Google's total Google services, and the top is the coding of the location of major protests across Cairo based on New York Times reporting. So I understand that this reporting, so you see the numbers, the first 3 days they reported that they happened only in Tahrir. On the 28th, they happened in 8 locations other than Tahrir, 7 locations other than Tahrir, plus Tahrir 8. And as you see, they die out till the 2nd, and it's in Tahrir for a while, and it picks up toward the end. So the idea is that we don't know exactly where these protests were happening across the city, but I use a sampling mechanism. So I say that as long as reporting of this major paper is uniform across the city, I can say that comparatively, the location of the protest went up on that day and went down afterwards. And I'm going to cross-check this later. So the way we did it, we looked at the reporters and graphic designers in the Times. They were looking at aerial photos and matching it with protest photos. So what I did, I run a count regression, a simple count regression of the protest dispersion on the disruption. I control for Friday and media announcements. It's quite significant, so I don't want to talk about numbers. It shows that actually disruption had a major effect on ballooning on helping the protest balloon around the city. How can it be cross-checked? So after the effect, after actually that paper went out and the results were discussed, we ran a survey. We asked people if they, in Cairo, we asked 500 so there were 500 face-to-face interviews and 200 online survey instances, and we asked them if they went out to protest, and if they did they go to Tahrir, right? So I was interested in the proportion of protesters who ended up going to the square. The idea was to figure out what was the percentage of people who in fact converged in the square. And in this diagram, you see that, so the blue one is the percentage of respondents who in fact reported that they participated in protests. So I have 4 time intervals. I asked them if they did it before the disruption, 25th to 27th, during the first day of disruption on the 28th, during the internet blackout, but when the cell phones were back, 29th to 1st, and when everything became normal, 3rd to 11th. So as you can see, the red one is the percentage of people who reported going to Tahrir. It's the lowest on the 28th. So compared to all other time intervals, the number of people, so the people were riding all around the city. So this is one way of cross-checking this dispersion hypothesis. So to me, when I first saw it, when I first saw the implications of the model and I looked at data, it was somehow interesting, because we usually think about protests and riots and popular movements as top-down hierarchical things. But there's another way of looking at these events, and that's when you see unrest happening everywhere. So it's decentralized. It's not managed through a central authority, and its nature completely different. The only way that people can overwhelm a government that is armed is through actually being dispersed, not through being hierarchically organized. And that's what a lot of these governments actually, in fact, they take it wrong, and they apply these old methods, and they have this way of thinking that is somehow not applicable to these new ways of generating linkages between people. So the question that I want to pose to you, and hopefully we're going to talk about it in Q&A, is, knowing this and knowing that sources of authority are going to be basically watching these things and these developments, what would be the new ways of actually, in fact, control in new media? So if shutting it down like this is not effective, what would it be effective? And if is there any advantage in fact, guessing it before the people that we don't want to guess, we don't want them to guess first? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Navid. Very interesting. We're going to go straight to the next speakers, but before that, and before I give a short introduction, I guess we should try to, if you've got any immediate questions, we'll take the questions and we'll hold the questions until the end, and Navid can respond later so you can think about them. Do you have any immediate responses, any immediate questions for Navid that we can note down now before we go to the next speakers? Anything which strikes you? No? Okay. Well, let's carry on. I'll note your question, Navid. We have Katie Pierce and Sarah Kenzia from, well, you'll tell me where you're from, on the effects of the internet on civic engagement under authoritarianism, the case of Azerbaijan. You want to come up? Thank you.
PowerPoint. Sound is okay?
It's fine. It's
Great,
fine. It's
thank
good.
you. Hopefully you can see on these screens. So I'm Dr. Katie Pierce. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Washington, which is in Seattle in the U.S. My co-author, Dr. Sarah Kenzier, recently completed her PhD in anthropology at Washington University. Those are different institutions. And our co-author, Dean Freelon, is an assistant professor in communication at American University and is not present. So we're going to talk about the effect of the internet on civic engagement under an authoritarian context. Since we have a little extra time, I'll broaden this out a little bit to speak a little bit more widely about the work that Sarah and I do in this particular context. Hopefully it'll be interesting to you all. So a little bit of an overview. The idea of civic engagement. This is people that are working to make their neighborhood better, their city better, their country better, or that they're somehow trying to make the society in which they live a better place. It's universally acknowledged as a desirable thing. We want our neighbors to help clean up after a tree falls down the street. We want people to get involved in our local schools. We want people to vote. This is something that generally we can say is universally accepted as something that people want. However, there are barriers that exist to these kind of behaviors. Some of them are economic barriers. People that are poor have a harder time doing this because they're busy trying to work jobs, trying to feed their families. It's understandable. People with greater education tend to be more likely to be engaged with this sort of activity. For example, many argue that the internet can reduce some of these barriers to civic engagement for two main reasons. First is that the internet can decrease the cost of participating. So, for example, if we all decided we're going to start an NGO to save koala bears, we could do that right now, right here. I'm glad someone supports this idea. We can start one right here using the internet in a way that 30 years ago would have been incredibly expensive. We can set up a website. We can all find a way to communicate with each other. Much, much less expensive than it would have been before the internet. Secondly, the ability for non-co-present participation. If you wanted to have our big protest to save the koala bears, organizing that together would be a lot of work. We'd have to have meetings, and then we'd have to get together every week and do these things. Now you can do a lot of those activities online. So it's cheaper and it's easier to do these sort of activities. So the question is, can the internet also reduce barriers under an authoritarian context? So the particular authoritarian context I'm going to talk about is one that might be familiar to you all. This is the very first time that Sarah and I have ever presented on Azerbaijan and not had to show a map. So this is a very exciting day for us. We do almost all of our work in this region. So Azerbaijan, as you may know, is a small former Soviet Muslim petro state. It has been ruled by a regime of a father and son since 1993. As a society, it has grown more and more oppressive as time has gone on. And at this point now, people the Azerbaijanis live marked in fear. I could go on and on about this if you want during Q&A. So under this sort of context, civic engagement is a little more challenging, as I'll go into in a moment. If the clicker... Okay, there we go. So I want to talk a little bit about different types of engagement. The first type of engagement I want to talk about is political engagement, and that is citizen participation in government. So that is things like voting, for example. The second type of engagement, and this all comes from a framework by Deli Carpini, is non-governmental efforts to improve society, and that is civic engagement. If we were doing this study in the US, we would not necessarily have to separate these ideas out. But in this particular context, the distinction really matters. In more authoritarian states, there are often no officially sanctioned ways to influence government decisions. Even though voting may exist, it doesn't necessarily matter. And so because of that, it's very important for us to acknowledge that there are forms of civic engagement which don't involve the government at all. And this is particularly important in these kind of contexts. Another thing I want to draw your attention to is the idea of publicity and privacy. Engaging, whether it be planting a tree in your neighborhood park or wearing a t-shirt of your favorite political candidate, has repercussions that can be both positive and negative. Publicity and privacy matters for engagement. And I want to describe what we mean by private versus public. Private is what is individual or pertains only to an individual, versus public, which is collective or actually impacts the interest of a collectivity. Within an authoritarian context, we also add that public and private also indicates the degree to which an action is capable of being observed. So, as an example of this, if I give money to a homeless person and no one else sees, no one can observe that action, that's a very private civic engagement, right? However, if I wear a t-shirt that says Barack Obama 2012 here in this audience, that's a very public form of engagement. You all can observe me doing that, and that can have both positive and negative repercussions. Maybe you think terribly of me now. Maybe you think wonderfully of me now. Maybe the government's watching me, and my public engagement can really impact me later. So that's why we want to talk about public versus private. So the internet and engagement. Interestingly enough, the case for what the internet can do for civic engagement, it's sort of a mixed bag. There's a number of studies that says that the internet can help civic engagement, that internet use can increase voting, can increase volunteerism, while there's many other studies that have actually found that the internet has no effect on these kind of activities. The people that were going to go and plant a tree in the neighborhood park would have done that before the internet anyway. So I just want to point out to you that it's not as simple as we think. A lot of mixed evidence here. So under an authoritarian context, internet can be used as a tool for surveillance and control by governments, but also it can potentially provide a platform for activism and political resistance. So this complicates the situation when we're talking about civic engagement and the internet under an authoritarian context. So the framework I want to present to you today, and I'll speak about the data that we have in a moment, looks at engagement that's either civic or political. Remember, political is with the government, civic is without the government, public or private, so that's able to be observed or not, and then with or without the affordances of the internet. I'm not sure that this slide will look very good on the small TV. I apologize. This is also in the paper if you want to look at it more closely. But just to give you some senses of what kind of activities we're talking about here and what the internet can do. So in this study, we looked at public civic engagement as attending a club meeting, for example, like a Rotary Club, volunteering, cleaning a public space like cleaning the neighborhood school or park, planting a tree. I wasn't just pulling that out of anywhere. We actually have data on it. And then discussing politics. Some may quibble that discussing politics is a private thing, but remember, our definition is capable of being observed. So what can the internet do for those kind of activities? Well, again, it can reduce the cost of these kind of engagement. You can volunteer online, for example. Also, you can do these things without being present at a place, maybe not planting a tree, but you could discuss politics without being co-present with someone. However, doing these public civic engagement can also increase the likelihood of others monitoring what you're doing. On the other hand, there also is a potential for anonymity that the internet affords. Public political engagement in this study, the only case we used here was attending a public meeting, and so that would be something like a rally or a city hall meeting. So the internet can provide affordance to this as well. Possibly you became more aware of a public meeting because of the internet, and also potentially if you attend a public rally, it's filmed and put on YouTube, more people could see you engaging. For private civic engagement, the activities are donating to charities, unless, I guess, you put on your Facebook, I just donated to this charity. But otherwise, we would assume this is a private activity. Giving money to a beggar, helping a stranger that was stranded on the road, or helping a neighbor with chores or babysitting. The internet could also, again, reduce the cost for engagement and co-presence on some of these. And then our private political engagement is writing a letter or making a phone call to a media agency, so a letter to the editor, for example. Again, the internet can reduce the cost for engagement. You can just email that letter off. But also there's a larger potential audience due to the internet. If your form of doing this is sending a comment on the Facebook page of the newspaper, that's they're a larger potential audience than if you had 20 years ago sent a letter to a television station. Okay, so that's our framework. Our research questions in this study, the first were how many Azerbaijanis are engaging in these activities. The second is what are their demographic characteristics. I'm not going to go into this now, but if you're interested, read it in the paper or we can talk about it during Q&A. But our primary research question is, what effect, if any, does the internet have on these different kinds of engagement in Azerbaijan? Our methods, we, for this study, used 2 nationally representative public opinion polls conducted here in Azerbaijan in 2011 and 2012. It was the end of 2011 for one, beginning of 2012 for the other, so fairly close in time. If you want to hear more about the sampling plan or the way that this data is collected, I'd be happy to tell you, but it's publicly available on the internet. It's very well done. Methodologically, it's fantastic. And for our analysis, we did binomial logistic regressions and linear regressions. If that sounds unappealing to you, don't worry. I'm not going to talk about numbers. But if you are interested, you can read in the paper. So what did we find? Okay, so for what activities did frequent internet use matter? So this is all controlling for demographics, that education, income, urbanness, age, were all controlled for. So frequently using the internet meant that someone was more likely to attend a civic or club. Also, people that use the internet more frequently are more likely to volunteer. Again, remember, this is controlling for wealth and education. Also, people that use the internet are more likely to discuss politics with close friends, and this was specifically associated with online news reading, not surprising. People that use social networking sites are more likely to discuss politics with close relatives. A very interesting finding is that using social networking sites was actually negatively related to discussing politics with neighbors. I imagine that why go and talk to your neighbors about the local politics when you have friends online you can do it with. In terms of the private civic engagement, people that go online more frequently here in Azerbaijan are much more likely to give money to charity. Again, controlling for wealth. People that in Azerbaijan that are online more frequently are more likely to attend public meetings. Also, people that go online more frequently in Azerbaijan are more likely to write letters and make phone calls to media outlets. So, for which activities of the internet not matter? Cleaning a public space and planting a tree. Okay, I can see why the internet wouldn't matter that much in those cases. And the private civic engagement activities, giving money to beggars, helping a stranger on the road, helping neighbors with chores or babysitting. You can imagine that the people that would be willing to babysit their neighbors' children are probably the internet use. Those are the same people that would have done it before the internet. So this is not terribly surprising that these were our findings. So what does this mean? Well, internet is related to civic and political engagement here in Azerbaijan, but civic more than political, just to make a point there. More public activities are more likely to be affected by internet use than private activities. And this all sums up into that the internet is actually indicative of civic life here in Azerbaijan, although perhaps not in the same way that it is in advanced democracies. So, although many would claim that authoritarianism and civic engagement are at odds with each other, there are many scholars that claim that it's impossible to have civic engagement under authoritarianism. We now actually have evidence that, in fact, it is happening here and that the internet is facilitating it. However, we cannot know whether those people that are on the internet more frequently are using the internet for civic purposes. For all we know, they're online playing World of Warcraft video games. They aren't necessarily joining Greenpeace. We do have qualitative evidence that people are engaging quite a bit in these sort of activities. I was just talking to someone this morning that was telling me about campaigns with the recent Iran earthquake to raise money in Azerbaijan for children online. But we don't know if these people in this survey, if that's what they're doing. The bigger question, though, that I would love to pose to the audience is, will internet tools lead to democracy? I don't think that the findings of our study are strong evidence that internet tools are leading to democracy. However, we do see an association here between frequent use of the internet and engaging in things that have values that align with democratic attitudes. Volunteerism, charity. These are things that we tend to associate with more democratic ideals. Also, since we are at the IGF, how does internet governance support or not support the use of the internet for civic purposes? Do people interested in internet governance, are we concerned with what people are doing online? Do people that want better internet governance do they want people to be online engaging in charity activities and activism? Or is it okay if all they're doing is playing World of Warcraft and talking to their friends on Facebook? What activities people are engaging online have tremendous implications for their own capital enhancement. Is that something that the internet governance community is interested in? So with that, I thank you very much, and we're happy to answer questions at this Q&A, but if you think of some later, these are our Twitter handles. We are all very active on social media using it for civic engagement, so feel free to ask us online as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you, and let's an echo of applause. Two very interesting presentations, some convergence there. I think straight away, I have lots of questions, but I want to throw it open to you. I wonder, I mean, the perception of internet, the perception of media, internet, online media, that's what really matters. I mean, it's whether internet is a stigmatized space, perhaps, or not. I mean, does it matter how the internet is portrayed in a country in terms of its use and its good use for good reasons that you're talking about? I mean, Navid, you talked about the control of social media. So it brings me to the question, the idea that do many countries perceive it as a threat still, or as an opportunity? I mean, okay, depends where you sit, but I mean, what's your take on that? Maybe I'd like to start with that question. I mean, for both of you, starting with Navid. What's your perception? And then you two.
Well, I think that the approaches are somehow mixed as the same as your results, and some governments are more sophisticated in the way they engage with social media and their opposition. I have an example, Russia, that if you have a more sophisticated government and you have more sophisticated ways of control, and you see what's happening in Egypt and other countries in the Middle East, and you don't know disruption and traditional ways of control, how they might work, you somehow engage in the medium, and that's what some of these governments do. So they're hedging the bet, so they're leveling the playfield. So as you can see, the results are mixed, because I mean, you can organize people using internet, but for high risk, let's say, rebellion or doing something dangerous, I'm not sure if knowing things or knowing about the news would, or knowing about the organization would help you as much as sometimes not knowing. And I mean, another thing that, you know, so when we talk about these issues, I want to raise this question, probably you guys can carry on from there, is to what extent we think that some of these instances of engagement, in fact, they are endogenous to the usage of internet. So if I'm a socially engaged person, if I'm involved in my community, if I'm up to date, and if I'm active, I'm also much more likely to use internet. So I can imagine that, you know, if you're living in in the outback and you're not involved in the social and political life, you also don't use internet. So how can we somehow decouple these two things?
I'll respond to your initial question about the perception of internet use that countries like to create. Just because we're in a country where there's a very interesting example of this, which is, you know, Azerbaijan wants to present itself as a technologically advanced society, as a modern society, and you can see this, you know, when you're driving through Baku. It also likes to present the internet as open, and I'm sure you'll hear about this more in the speech tomorrow. And to some degree it is. I mean, more so than other countries in former Soviet authoritarian states, the internet is not blocked as much, it's not filtered as much, it's not censored as much. But what they do instead is punish the people who go and use the internet for that purpose through arrest and through intimidation. And so there's this way that the government is able to balance these two issues, this issue of public perception, where it can technically be labeled as having an open internet, and threat and control of their of society. And so I think that's just something to sort of to keep in mind as we're here at IGF over the next few days.
I mean, when I think it was Navid who talked about the London riots, and the perception of how to deal with the situation was quite revealing. I mean, okay, nothing happened. I mean, you know, there was still, you know, access to online media, but it was quite revealing that discussion, you know, really had a big effect. I mean, I guess there was some pushback somewhere along the line about not to do anything regarding cutting any social media. So,
yeah, I think that's well, it somehow brought up very extremely interesting legal questions and policy-related questions that it was extensively debated with the mayor, I remember, and all the way to the prime minister level. So, you know, they didn't do anything, and I don't think that they regretted it.
yeah.
Right?
No, I mean, it was just very revealing about what happened, what was said, and then what didn't happen thereafter. That was all. I think it was very,
yes,
for me, very significant. I mean,
so, yeah, absolutely. So that's a question. That's a policy and related and legal question that is not, in fact, explored enough, and I expect that it's going to be somehow posed again and again until we have a good understanding of what we should do in the cases of social unrest. Another issue that makes it very complicated is that going viral, let's say, you know, when you have a riot happening, sometimes, you know, tweeting something is important not because of the context or not because of the way, because of your intention at the beginning, but the way it actually went viral after the effect. So how are we going to hold some of, you know, initiators responsible legally, let's say in riots or even in politics? I think these are very interesting questions.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to the point that I mentioned at the beginning, which is that for some it was really going viral, videos, etc., was about courage. It was about giving people the courage to go out on the streets. So it really was, the internet, I think, felt like it's a space of hope for many people. So that's what I took away from a particular discussion. I'd like to open the floor and to you. This is an exchange to some questions and responses. So if you put your hands up, I can see you first, and then you at the back. Okay, thank you.
Hi,
your name, please.
I'm Hadi Askari from Delft University. Thank you for the interesting presentations. I have a question to Katie and Sarah. So there is some discussion going on that the use of social media actually, in a way, stops people from being political, because it gives them a false sense of that, for instance, they're doing a virtual protest online, and it gives them some kind of satisfaction that they did their job, whereas if that didn't happen, maybe they would go on, I don't know, write graffiti on a wall or express themselves in another way. And it kind of touches also on Navid's point about what happens when you actually cut down, stop these sites, and the way it affects the population. Do you have any thoughts on that?
There's actually a really interesting example for Azerbaijan written by an Azerbaijani blogger where he compared the internet to the Matrix. And so when real life
The
is
film
kind
The
of...
Matrix.
Yeah, sorry, to the film The Matrix, to another world where he's sort of leaving the apolitical life in Azerbaijan behind because, generally people don't like to talk about contentious politics here, and enter this virtual sphere where political discussion is able to happen. And so that's pretty much what you're saying. What people have kind of discovered, though, is that Matrix world doesn't actually exist because there are real on-the-ground ramifications of that kind of online political discussion. And so the border between a virtual world and what people might say a real world, it isn't there, and that's changed especially in the last few years. At the same time, though, I think because there's such a heavy diaspora presence of Azerbaijanis who are a little bit safer from government repercussions, there is this element of an imaginative online space where people are really able to communicate, and because of course they can't do anything on the ground because they're not actually on the ground, that's enhanced. So I think that's a really important point that you brought up, and I don't know if you have anything to add, Katie.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the other interesting twist on that, and you're absolutely right that can occur, is that I feel that one worry that I have is that the internet, it can be a bit of a distraction. So we can imagine, I don't know, some young adults that perhaps would be so fed up with the situation that under 20 years ago circumstances or 10 years ago circumstances might actually get active. Yet the online world, we all do it. We can get lost watching video clips, reading blogs, reading whatever you want. I worry that it might be drawing attention away from young minds that might have been activated otherwise. I mean, I'm not saying that that's happening to everyone, but that in the internet is complicated. It's not necessarily a solution. You can't just throw internet at something and assume people are going to have a Twitter revolution the next day. That the fact is, the vast majority of what people are doing online is entertainment-based content. So, as much as I'd like to think that those cat videos will lead to overthrow of the government, I just don't see it happening anytime soon.
I mean, the internet, people still need to be informed. I mean, people use media because they want to be properly informed, with accuracy and truthfulness, credibility. I mean, when you take that away, I mean, just putting people in front of an internet connection, I mean, what does that achieve? I think there's a lot to be said about, the transmission of knowledge and information which is sort of filtered, screened in terms of being understood from a professional media context. We have a lady at the back there, and then we have Milton. Oh, sorry, what?
No, I wanted to mention just one quick thought, and it said, internet. Well, you're right in a way that it can be distracting, but I also want to vouch for it, in the sense that it changes the. One important thing is it changes the culture of news collection. So once you actually get used to hearing, talking to your friends about the news, talking to your social circle about the news, you're basically decoupled from the government. And the way, if you look at the traditional society, it's amazing the gap between the older generation and the new generation used to the internet. They're very much, they're absolutely less connected to mass media for collecting their social and political news. They talk to their friends. So what the implications of this change of culture, what the implications are, we don't know, and we actually see it sometimes. We've seen it in streets of the Middle East, and it's amazing. Once in fact you decouple them from the tool that gave them that culture, they regenerated in different ways, and that gives you actually in a street action, which is, I think that shift in culture is very significant and I think worthy of thought.
Well, thank you very much. The lady at the back, your name please.
Thank you. My name's Sarah Logan. I'm from the Australian National University. Thank you all for your presentations. They're fantastic. My question is for Katie and Sarah. One of the things I think we can say about civic engagement is it's kind of the operationalization of a collective political identity. And one of the things I'm interested in is how online civic engagement or online activity affects that idea of a collective political identity or a collective identity in any way. And I'm wondering if in your research you came across any sort of findings that might relate to that. Do people who are active online, do they think about themselves as part of a collective in a different way than those who aren't active online?
I think that's certainly true, and like I said, in a lot of more politically active communities, you have a large diaspora exile population that interacts regularly with people on the ground, and then that changes the political culture and the kind of discussions that people are having, because information is able to travel between people more freely. At the same time, though, I think it's important that we don't romanticize the idea of communities that that collate on the internet, because like any internet community, political activist community are full of infighting and gossip and rumors, and especially when you're dealing with an authoritarian society where information isn't able to come out, people will have a lot of heated and differing opinions about the same thing. So I think people are people, and regardless what kind of political goals they're fighting for, there's a similarity in human interaction that I think spans any kind of geographical area.
Well, Sarah's answer was much more interesting than the one I'm going to give you, just to add on top of that. Within this data, there was also a fantastic measure of identification, and it was a degree. You asked how much you identified with your family, your neighborhood, your city, your region, your country, your ethnic group, and the world. And I've used this as a proxy measure for cosmopolitanism. How much more do you identify as a global citizen than you do as an Azerbaijani or as a member of your town? And we do find that internet users, again, controlling for education and age and income and all these things that would probably factor into both internet use and cosmopolitanism, that in fact internet users are much more cosmopolitan, much more identifying as global citizens than those who use it less frequently. And so, to your question about a collective political identity, one of my great fears, actually, about this region is that as people, these elite are going online and having a wonderful time watching Game of Thrones and talking about politics, that they're becoming so different from the average citizen. And we even have an informant once said to me, I wouldn't even know what to talk about with my village cousins anymore. Like, they're just living in different worlds. So in terms of a collective political identity, this idea about more global citizens as more internet exposure to outside things, differing from regular people, this elite divide, as I said, I fear it a lot, like what the longer term implications of that kind of divide within a country are.
Thank you very much. Yes, the gentleman there. Oh, sorry, Milton, sorry.
Is this on?
Yes.
So this is probably going to come across as a very abstract methodological question, but I just want to... It's not on? Okay. I want to ask you about the historical dimension of these. I think the problem with social science as we practice it in this quantitative way is that you give the impression that something like the internet is a little nugget, a well-defined variable that you introduce like an experiment in the physical sciences. And of course this is completely wrong. I mean, there are a bunch of people in different contexts using something called the internet, and they're very creative about how they use it and when they use it and how they respond to it. And so, like, some of the correlations you've established, they seem like very good social science, and I trust the results, but I trust them about the Caucasus in, circa 2010, whenever you did the study. What about 2 years from now? What about when the government learns this or that is happening? And the same thing with the Egyptian thing. It was obviously a blunder because of the specifics of time and place to turn off the internet, but would it be a blunder, would it have been a blunder 10 years before or 10 years after? Would the effects have been completely different? So is it, what is the question you're actually trying to answer here? Is it the effect of the internet or some other question that I didn't get.
Just to clarify one thing, these weren't correlations. This was a regression model, just for the record. And also, so this data set is collected annually, and so we have the same items going back to 1999. So, and I do overtime modeling with this data set as well. And so now, in Azerbaijan now, we're in the low teens in terms of internet penetration. But I've been watching since it was 0. And in the neighboring countries, we're now at 30 and 40% internet penetration. It's quite a bit higher. So with that alone, I do have a little bit of a better sense of over time what kind of changes exist. So just that on the methodological side. Also, this was a measure of internet frequency, not just have the internet or not. So I completely agree with you that it's, it's a little bit arbitrary, but it's not, at least it's a measure of frequency. And we also within the paper did 20 different internet activities. What are people doing online, not just if they use it or not. And so we hope with that it contextualizes a little bit. Reading news online is different than just do you have the internet or not. But in terms of talking about the over time changes, as much as I would love to be able to tell you that as people use the internet more, become more developed with their internet use, that their engagement activities change or become more developed, I hate to say it, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The elites in these countries are the ones that tend to be using the internet for more capital-enhancing activities like blogging and news reading, online classes, etc. And there has been almost no change over time as internet use has grown between the non-elite in these states and the entertainment activities in which they're engaging. So that doesn't exactly answer your question, but maybe it's a little bit of a hint.
Also, just one more thing to add. I mean, one of the broader points that Katie and I try to raise in our research about this region is that you can't extract the internet from the broader political culture, and that is going to be far more influential, and if you're going to try to make some kind of prognostication, than anything having to do with the internet. And so, yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Well, to answer your question very concretely, well, definitely I think that there's a historical context that my talk about the internet basically relies on. So, yes, it's about actually things that are probably more general than the most recent communication revolution that we are seeing. And to second this assessment, this statement, I want to mention 2 examples. One of our colleagues just brought up this point today, here in fact in this meeting, is that there were 2 other instances of actually a situation similar to what happened in Egypt, but in fact in very different contexts. So in 1948, I believe newspapers were not running for a while in the US, and there's a famous piece in Journal of Communication edited by Paul Lazarsfeld and others, the pioneers of communication research, and also another one in 1977 about telephone service being out in Manhattan after the fire, apparently, and they mentioned this anxiety, this sense of anxiety that is basically somehow takes over the population, and I think this is very revealing of these patterns that are historically recurrent. So what we are seeing is a new opportunity to basically test these new these phenomena again. We've been given a new opportunity. Newspapers are not anymore that important. The internet is extremely important. So the phenomenon, you see it with the internet. So there's a side point, and I want to again emphasize anxiety and lack of knowledge as incentive to riot, as opposed to knowledge. We are used to think that political action comes out of knowledge and conviction. I want to actually ask you to think about how uncertainty and anxiety can make you act politically, not necessarily the other way.
Well, the right to receive information. I think the right to seek, impart, and to receive information. And that's for me very, very clear. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think I take Milton's point, which is that I agree. I think the internet is culture. Personally, it's a cultural shift. It's culture. It's not just one point, and I think it's much bigger and wider than we all imagine. There's a gentleman over there who'd like to speak. You? You and then you, please. Thank you. And your name? Thank you.
My name is Anawak. I'm from Brazil. The point is that people that is connected is not only about get content, consume content, but produce content. So we see a lot in Brazil people producing their own videos, going to the things going on and making movies about it and talking about it in their own version of what happens. And we see what we see in Brazil, that is a democratic country anyway, is that government is not authoritative, but they are trying to control what people can publish or can't publish. So how do you see the point that this is not an authoritative problem, but in democratic countries, governments are trying to finish it or control it, the democracy on internet. And did you saw that in your studies too?
Can you rephrase the question a little clearer? Sorry, I don't completely know what you're trying to ask.
Well, governments are trying to control what you can put online or not. Mm-hmm. Of course, in authoritative governments, it's more clear. But in democratic governments, it's happening too. You know, projects like SOPA or like all the things are trying to control what you put online. So it's not only an authoritative government problem, it's a democratic problem. It's control over internet. So
no, I think that's a really important point. I mean, the work that Katie and I have been doing has been mostly on authoritarian countries, but we often find that there is this kind of resonance, you know, and I think it speaks to a lack of control about what happens to the information that you create once it's out there, whether it can be censored, how it's going to be presented, you know, and those are the kind of questions, you know, that we're dealing with over the course of the next 3 days. So I guess it's, you know, it's important to keep in mind those similarities. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yes, thank you very much. The gentleman there, Your name, please.
Hi, you here, right? My name is Atit Surya Ungkun from Thai Netizen Network. But probably in this context, I'm just graduate from Thammasat University in Thailand as well. I did a study, not exactly like this, but it's concerning about the cultural politics on online social movement in Thailand in general. Maybe the things that you mentioned about like entertainment, right? That's like actually the things that people like, most of the people online like went to. The things that probably like overlapping entertainment and politics on the internet at the moment is probably what we call like internet memes. That is really well circulated. And even like in the circles of like the people who not really like political engaged, they do like share and like forward these like memes all around. But then again, like back to the point of like our Brazilian friends say that okay, internet is not only about like consuming, right? It's also like producing content as well. From my finding, it's still like limited anywhere that I found that those people who actually producing the well-circulated internet memes are either like designer or working in IT industries, or either like a television program producers or ads or copywriters, something like that. So maybe generally we can like push a little bit further. We can call this like those like Richard Florida call these people as like creative class. And so I think the sense of like you also mentioned like the sense of like global citizenship, right? Maybe like, I don't know, in my finding it doesn't really like going like to that point yet, but I think the education and also like the work and the type of work is also like really play into this game as well, because like there's also a lot of studies that about like the political campaign as a stage play, and how actually like many citizens that concern themselves as an active citizen in the end enjoy the electoral campaign as a kind of entertainment. Mm-hmm. And everything is just finished after the campaign finished. They don't feel themselves to have like to engage more after the campaign.
So
thanks.
Thank you. So the sustainability of civic engagement on the internet. We need to wrap up I'd like to ask you to give some final, maybe to respond and to give some final remarks, please. Thank you.
I'll just respond briefly to what you just said. I have an article actually right now on Al Jazeera called "The Power of Memes." That's exactly on all of the topics that you just brought up. So you know, I will say no more. Go and read it. Would you like final comments?
Maybe. Your microphone.
About well, I guess we had, you know, we had somewhat a little bit somehow different approaches toward civil engagement. So to wrap it up, or to somehow put these two somehow they're not disparate. I think they complement each other in a way. I talked about how dispersion and how sometimes lack of information and lack of hierarchy can entice people to step in. You talked about how organization, how hierarchical networks, how mobilization efforts can effectively bring out people into the social and political arena. So I think, you know, I guess the most interesting thing about this debate, which is ongoing, and you know, you have Shirky versus the cynics and all others. Is that, you know, they're two opposing and somehow I think plausible views. So they they tell us that the view of the role of social media in political mobilization or social mobilization is more nuanced than any of these two camps argue for. It's a little bit, you know, it's somehow these are two forces that basically balance each other.
So thank you. I'm going to wrap up by saying thank you to all. I think from my point of view, it's been a very interesting discussion. I mean, I think the internet is bringing the edges of democracy. I mean, it's moving away from these collective groups of people who vote in the same way and who assemble in traditional means. And I think it's taking these people who are on the edges, who don't fit into those normal groups that, you know, that have been in the past. And I think it's changing the way that we see things and do things collectively, individually. So I think that, you know, it's a great tool for those edges. And I think the edges are coming together more and more in the models and in the graphs that you've been showing, I think. So I look forward to the future. We need to look to the future. We wrap up. Do you want any more points before we wrap up? Yes, sorry. Okay. Leo.
Thanks a lot. We do have coffee again. We reconvene at 4:05. Just on the practical side, this evening we're going to make a reservation at the restaurant where we just have a table if people want to join. You're welcome to join. Everybody has to pay for their own dinner. Can I see some hands of those who are interested? It's in the middle of town. It's a very nice restaurant, not that expensive, but I need to know more or less how many people would join. Can I see some hands? Okay. I have some cards. For those interested, I'll put them here on the table and you grab a card.
Thank you very much. Session's closed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
This session was very
you liked it?
interactive, and I'm I also
But, you know,